Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of time, I'm going to get straight to the point. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a blatant attempt by the state, ZANU-PF, and its proxies to keep us distracted by sideshows. However, on behalf of the 2.6 million Zimbabweans who put their faith in the MDC Alliance, we are putting the state and all its operators on notice. We will not be distracted from the real issues bedeviling the nation. The real issue is that corruption is killing us. Let's start with the numbers. In 2017, 2.7 billion disappeared under Command Agriculture. Of that 2.7 billion, 1.5 billion was withdrawn on a single day, the 27th of December 2017. In 2018, $3.5 billion was unaccounted for, again under Command Agriculture. We await the next Auditor General's report, but anticipate that this pattern of state looting is going to continue. Now, 7.7 million Zimbabweans face food insecurity of a nation of approximately 15.6 million people. This means that an estimated 5.5 million people in rural Zimbabwe and a further 2.2 million people in urban Zimbabwe are facing food insecurity over the next year. When the MDC trio demonstrated against this hunger, they were abducted, they were tortured, and they were sexually assaulted. They were prosecuted, and they were re-victimized and harassed for speaking out on behalf of 7.7 million Zimbabweans. Corruption is killing us. Corruption is literally starving us. 63% of Zimbabweans are living below the poverty line. Despite the over 6 billion that has been poured into Command Agriculture, Zimbabwe faces what the UN has described as its worst hunger crisis in a decade. The UN went a step further to classify this crisis as man-made. And according to the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, women and children are bearing the brunt of the crisis, with 90% of children aged 6 months to 2 years not consuming enough food. 29.9% of urban households are cereal insecure. Corruption is killing us. Now, Mr. Mnangagwa signed the Zimbabwe Domestic and Humanitarian Appeal for Assistance in April 2020, appealing for a total of 2.2 billion worth of humanitarian aid over the next 12 months. Of that money, only 955.67 million is required for the food insecurity response. This is far less than the 3.5 billion looted under Command Agriculture in just 2018. In fact, the entire amount requested in aid for 2020 is less than what has been spent propping up those who benefit from looting under the Command Agriculture scheme. This has not only left us unproductive, but extremely vulnerable. Now, in Mr. Mnangagwa's appeal for 2.2 billion that I've referred to just now, 37 million was requested for health. And yet, just in the last fortnight, we've seen the attempted looting of contracts up to the value of $60 million due to the dubious procurement processes and the insatiable appetite of those right at the very, very top of this regime. We have Priska Mfumira, who is alleged to have looted funds from NASA in excess of $95 million. The amounts looted through these corrupt acts would have been enough to fund health assistance over 2 times over. Yet where is Ms. Mupfumira today? She's walking free. No accountability and no political will to bring her or her accomplices to book. Pensioners are not receiving pensions. Their funds have been completely eroded by inflation, which sits at over 765%. As I stated, in the past few weeks, COVIDgate has implicated very senior government officials, including, as I said, those at the very, very top. You'd always see theatrics, weak investigations, and the arrest of the smallest, weakest, least powerful fish. Why is Obadiah Moyo walking free? Why is George Guvamatanga walking free? Why is Mthuli Ncube walking free? Why is Collins Mnangagwa walking free? Corruption is killing us. In 2019, we saw allegations of 17,000 tons of maize being imported from Tanzania at $600 a ton, yet world prices were only at $240 a ton. There was no investigation into this allegation, and the public is still left wondering who organized this contract and who exactly is benefiting from it. According to the Anti-Corruption Commission, ZAC itself, quoting Transparency International Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe loses at the very least $1.8 billion a year to corruption. And this figure is only conservative. Corruption is killing us. Quite simply, the state has employed all manner of distractions, disguised as foiled coup plots, army-backed takeovers of private property, RTGS payments dressed as US dollar allowances, and many other theatrics, parliamentary recalls, fake opposition internal disturbances. However, we say very unequivocally, we will not be distracted because corruption is killing us. So as a way forward, the MDC Alliance says this: we want and we demand decisive, tangible action. We demand a public, televised inquiry into the COVIDgate scandal. We are sick and tired of corruption being swept under the carpet and the perpetrators of corruption being exonerated behind closed doors to the detriment of the citizen and the public. It is the citizens at the end of the day who pay the price and bear the brunt of the bad governance by ZANU-PF. And so we demand accountability and transparency, because corruption is killing us. If ZAC cannot act independently and transparently, it should be disbanded. We are tired of the catch and release strategy being employed when dealing with the most damning corruption scandals that cost the fiscus the most. The true independence of ZAC must be part of a wider raft of political reforms. As every Zimbabwean knows, corruption is everywhere, but ZAC is mute. The inescapable conclusion that the public has to reach is that this important institution in the fight against corruption has become captured. We want action because corruption is killing us. Arrest the big fish and invest the cases thoroughly. Where is Priska Mufumira? Where is the NASA investigation? What is being done to investigate corruption at Zinara, what is being done to investigate corruption at ZIMSEC, and all the parastatals that were named in the Auditor General's report. Year in and year out, the Auditor General does all the work, but her reports gather dust and are not followed up by any meaningful investigation, by any meaningful prosecution or conviction. Corruption is killing us. And as you know, in terms of Section 255 of the Constitution, ZAC has a duty not only to investigate corruption, but to expose it as well. But what we've seen as citizens and as the opposition is that ZAC is the place where corruption cases go to die. ZAC is the place where corruption cases go to be swept under the carpet. We have not yet had a single expose of corruption from ZAC, not one. Yet we know from the Auditor General, from our investigative journalists, from reports of the IMF, from the UN Special Rapporteur on Hunger, and from our own daily lived realities that corruption is killing us. Billions are lost each year, and yet there's not been a single call from ZAC for the looters to pay back the money. As the MDC Alliance, we make that call now. We make that demand now. The looters must pay back the money because corruption is killing us. We also demand the strengthening of the National Prosecution Authority. It should not, in terms of the law, be an extension of the president, and I say that term advisedly, or the executive's office. In terms of Section 260 of the Constitution, the Prosecutor General must exercise his or her functions impartially and without fear, favor, prejudice, or bias. The Prosecutor General is accountable to the public. And in terms of Section 260, the principles by which he or she decides whether and how to institute and conduct criminal proceedings must be publicly explained. And so we demand an explanation as to why top government officials have not been arrested. Is this because the Prosecutor General and some of his officials are housed at Mr. Mnangagwa's office? What principles are protecting those at the top? Why are they being allowed to steal with impunity? Yet we see MDC Alliance members who protest simply about hunger, the hunger that's being experienced and felt by 7.7 million Zimbabweans, are arrested, they're abducted, they're tortured, they're sexually assaulted. The citizens simply have to know. In fact, we demand to know. The opposition demands to know what principles are guiding the functions of the NPA as it carries out what are meant to be its constitutional functions, or fails to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption is killing us. As the MDC Alliance, in Parliament, we are going to push for the key amendments to the Public Finance Management Act so that there are consequences for those who do not comply with the requirement to timeously report and account to Parliament on government spending. There has to be a personal cost and personal liability to those leakages caused by corruption and maladministration. We're going to oppose tooth and nail any constitutional amendment, but in particular constitutional amendments that remove parliamentary scrutiny over public spending. We're going to continue the work that's being done by the Public Accounts Committee to bring to book perpetrators of corruption. And we demand that every public officer must declare their assets, as was promised in January 2018. And this disclosure must be made available to public scrutiny, and when necessary, lifestyle audits must be conducted by Zimra. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of 2020, our president, Nelson Chamisa, outlined the MDC Alliance's 5 big fights. One of those key fights was the fight against corruption. We take the fight against corruption extremely seriously. We will not be deterred from fighting it on all fronts, including in Parliament, through peaceful protest, and on social media. We refuse to accept any distraction that is not in the public interest, because right now, corruption is killing us. The architects and perpetrators of this corruption must be brought to book. The MDC Alliance has set out a comprehensive program for the resolution of the national crisis from which the corruption crisis stemmed, in its Road to Economic Recovery, Legitimacy, Openness and Democracy Reload document. This is the comprehensive agenda that we've set out to end Zimbabwe's current economic crisis. But in closing, I'll say this, that economies are not resuscitated by fasting and prayer. They're resuscitated by good governance, by transparency, and by accountability. The only demon binding our economy is that of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mayara, the People's Spokesperson. I'm going to take questions now. Those who want to seek clarifications, raising up your hands.
Thank you very much. Organizing.
Yes, see, my brother.
Thank you. My question is, I have a twofold question. The first one relates to these prosecutions by SAT. I understand and I believe that there is the option of private prosecution, and we have not seen the opposition or the civil society taking that option to private prosecute, investigate, and prosecute those guys who would have breached our laws. Secondly, in 1997, there was a parliamentary reform process which took place and resulted in a reform which called for asset declaration by our public officials. And up to date, we have not seen nor heard of any public official who has declared their assets, except that these declarations are said to be filed somewhere and are never in the public knowledge. And we don't know why the opposition would not have asked, using its representative in Parliament, and push for this asset declaration to be made public.
Thank you.
Okay, another one? Another question or clarification? I think Nani, Advocate, can respond.
Okay, so on the question of private prosecutions, the law on private prosecutions is quite strict, and one of the things that I know that Honourable Tendai Biti is taking up is to liberalize or widen the powers of the public to take up private prosecutions. So that's something that's certainly on the Alliance's agenda. Concerning the need to declare private assets, again, that's something, like I've indicated, that's on the agenda of the opposition, and that will be taken seriously in Parliament. But it's incumbent on every citizen, because remember, it's Mr. Mnangagwa himself who indicated that, you know, we are going to declare our assets, but we've never seen them do that. So it's incumbent upon every single citizen to hold the government to account on that issue. If you see someone building a big fat mansion on a mountaintop, and you know that they're a civil servant or they are as a minister, we have to hold them to account. Because if you look at all the contracts, for example, on COVID-Gate, they tell a big story. If you see some of the cars that are being driven by these ministers and their children, it tells a big story. So it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to hold the government to account on the lifestyles that they hold. And Zimra's powers, again, must be strengthened. Again, that's a legislative issue. That's on the agenda of the MDC Alliance, that, look, they should take these issues up, because that's where the public's money is going. So, indeed, will take that issue up, because it will go a long way in dealing with the issue of corruption, because that's where our money is. It's in people's private pockets instead of dealing with public utilities.
Thank you, Advocate. Yes, Bula.
Yes, I just wanted, I don't know if you've addressed it, but the nurses have downed tools and then they were on strike. And yesterday they were demonstrating in front of luxurious cars that we bought for the Health Services Board. So in terms of, as the MDC, how do you look at it? And also on record, the spokesperson of President Emmerson Mnangagwa said that the strengthened lockdown that was happening over the past 2 days was because of a security threat that was imminent, and that they were responding to it, rather it had really nothing to do with COVID-19 in his statement. So what is your reaction to it?
Thank you so much. I'll take those questions in turn. You've raised two. I'll deal with the first one. The question of the strike by the nurses and the doctors, particularly the one that happened at Parinyatwa yesterday, and I think there's been another one today at UBH. That is the exact expression of the corruption crisis that I speak to. You can't have a situation where Obadiah Moyo for the last 2-3 weeks has been exposed for facilitating corruption, and yet that very same health minister is failing to pay the frontline workers in the COVID-19 fight. What that shows us is that the very human cost of corruption is on our doorstep. You then see the cars that are being bought by the Health Services Board. Again, that corruption finds expression in the poor priorities of these parastatals and public bodies. Instead of paying services, instead of paying health workers, instead of putting the money where it matters most towards public services that would benefit the public, they're putting the money into their own pockets. It's the elites that are being served by the money that should benefit us. And we speak strongly against that as the MDC Alliance. And what we're saying is that ZAC should be in the forefront of investigating that. They do absolutely nothing. They watch the sort of corruption and they do nothing about it. So we take strong exception to that, and we call upon ZAC to act. Secondly, on the question of the security threats, we say that, again, this is the distraction. These are the distractions that we continue to talk about. Whenever there's a flare-up with a revelation on the corruption, you see these strategies. They deploy armies. So instead of talking about the corruption, the COVID gate, the fact that they need to arrest people and pay back the money, we are then stuck in talking about soldiers, stuck in talking about, oh, is there a coup happening? We then forget. But no, we will not be distracted. Because if there is a genuine change in the security situation, we know what the Constitution says about deploying the army. The president has to deploy the army, and he has to report to Parliament around why. If there's been a change in the lockdown status, that has to be reported. We were told that we're now at lockdown stage 2. If that has changed, we have to be formally told. We cannot be told about that in some dodgy tweet, in a ghost account by some famed government official. That's not the way sound public administration works. So we say that that is an attempt, again, to distract the masses from this very important corruption issue. And we say no. Pay back the money, arrest those responsible for corruption, and we want accountability. We don't want this issue forgotten about, because what they're hoping for is that we forget about COVID-gate. We're not going to forget. And in my address, I mentioned step by step all the incidents of corruption. We'd forgotten about NASA. We'd forgotten about Command Agriculture. We'd forgotten about COVID-gate. The citizens are watching, because every day life gets worse in Zimbabwe, but we forget that the reason things are where they are, the reason the crisis is where we are, is because of the failed politics, which finds expression then in this looting and the corruption. And we say, no, this must come to an end now.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I think I'm going to take the last 3 questions, if
Thank
any.
you. Thank you, Organizing
One,
Secretary.
2, the second bite
Yes,
is
it is
the
cheating.
last one.
Okay. So there are consultations. Going on the amendment bill.
Thank you.
Is the MDC spokesperson, the MDC Alliance, and there's a legal officer, there's a legal expert.
Yes.
How do you see that?
Thank you. That's a very important question. In fact, we've put our official position on the current public hearings that are taking place on record. Now, the first thing I wish to highlight is that we have said no to those amendments. Instead of amending the Constitution, they must implement the Constitution. What we expect to see as the MDC Alliance is concerted efforts by the government to align laws to the Constitution. You can't have over 20 amendments to the Constitution before they've even taken steps to align that Constitution, align laws to that Constitution as it exists. But if you look at the substance of the amendments that are being proposed, they further entrench power into the hands of the executive. The president will now have more power in terms of that Constitution, in terms of the proposed amendments. For example, he'll have power to appoint judges without any public scrutiny, without the interview process. And we say that the absence of checks and balances in that manner are bad for our democracy. They enshrine and entrench, imperial presidency, which is what we fought against when we voted resoundingly in the referendum in 2013. What we've said emphatically as the MDC Alliance is that the Constitution is the bedrock of a strong society. We should not be in a rush to change it. The Constitution amending process should be people-driven. You can't have a situation where soldiers are stopping people from moving, as we saw yesterday in Bulawayo, and yet you say there's a public hearing process. What if someone was leaving their house yesterday at Bulawayo to go and make their view known that they don't want any amendments to the Constitution, and yet soldiers turn them back? The Constitution itself says that any amendment to the Constitution has to be driven by a wide consultation process. So we strongly oppose not only the manner in which it's being done, but the very fact that amendments to the Constitution are taking place. And we put this on record. So I hope that answers you in that regard. Thank you.
Senator Douglas Monzora of the MDCT says he's going to continue with the recalling your MPs as they belong to his party. What is your strategy as a party?
So obviously we say that political power comes from the people. Anyone who says that I own MPs has completely missed the point. MPs belong to the people. So whether it's Kope, whether it's Monzoro, they've completely missed the point of the parliamentary process. Parliament is an expression of the will of the people. So again, that's part of the diversion that we say is ZANU-PF led, but more fundamentally, political power comes from the people. So you can't say, I own these MPs, they're mine, and I'm going to keep recalling them. We, like I've said repeatedly, are going to fight that strategy politically. And you cannot say you represent people in Parliament when those very people are saying, we don't want to be represented by you, number one. Second of all, the MDC Alliance is a separate, distinct political party from the MDCT. It's not a question of, factions. These are two separate, distinct political parties. It's like ZANU Ndonga and ZANU-PF. We registered before ZEC separately and distinctly. We have different structures, different constitutions, with different legal entities, with different legal personas. So the two can never be conflated. So Douglas Monzora is not law. We say, and we've said repeatedly, that position is flawed. The MPs that are currently in Parliament on behalf of the MDC Alliance got there on an MDC Alliance ticket, and they represent the MDC Alliance. And when we say 2.6 million people voted for the MDC Alliance, they knew exactly who they were voting for. They weren't confused. Everyone went to the ballot box, and they had the option to vote for one party, the MDCT, and another party, the MDC Alliance. They chose decisively for the MDC Alliance.
Thank you, Spokes. The last one, Glenn.
Yes, Madam Spokesperson, there are allegations that youths aligned to a political party attempted to enter Harvest House, and there was a bit of some violence. How do you plead to that? And lastly, you've been accused as a political party of
Maybe let me deal with that first, and then you can ask your other question, because I want to put our position as a party, the MDC Alliance, on record. We're a party of rules. If we wanted to resort to self-help in the manner in which the MDCT has done, we would have done so the day that the army took Harvest House. We didn't do so. The very minute they took over, we took a step back. And I think you saw what Secretary General Charlton Wende did. That very night when he was called and was advised that there was a disturbance, he went there. And the first thing he asked for is, where are the police? He looked for the police to make a criminal complaint. When he went to the police, he was advised, no, talk to the soldiers, Tara nima soldier. And he said, how can I talk to them? Go Tara nima soldier. Did him civilian. You remember that conversation, and I think it's been widely circulated. There's a video to that effect. It's very clear. If we were a party that resorted to self-help, what would have happened on that day is we would have fought back with violence. We didn't do so. In fact, what did we do? We rushed to court because that is what the law requires. You do not take the law into your own hands. And ever since that day, we have not taken the law into our own hands. If you noticed, we are here at the media center. Even though we have the legal right to be an occupation of Harvest House because we respect the rule of law, we're a party that does not take the law into our own hands. We're a party of rule. So I want that to be abundantly clear. There is no way youths aligned to the MDC alliance would go and start violence there. It's in fact the MDC-T that roped in the army, that roped in soldiers, that roped in the police in acts of self-help to take the law into their own hands. Right now they have their own youths in a manner that has no court order, they've got no respect for the law, and we simply choose not to play those games. And what we have said consistently is that we're not going to engage into a sterile debate about buildings. We are focused, and as I've indicated in today's press conference, about fighting the people's fight. One of our big 5 fights is the fight against corruption. That's what we're focused on, issues that are to do with the people. We don't want to be bogged down in these fissures. So the answer to your question in short is no. Our party youths are not involved in those acts of violence.
Okay, and then my last question, Madam Spokesperson, is that you've been accused of not being able to provide solutions to most of the questions that confront you as a political party. You have been kicked out of your alleged home, Harvest House. Your MPs are being withdrawn from Parliament, and you appear not to have a solution. And instead, people accuse you of playing smart politics by just issuing statements and making statements without even actually doing anything.
Well, you know, our vision is to win Zimbabwe for change. So we are not, bogged down about the issues about fighting for this asset or that asset. Our political mandate derives from the people, and we've set out a broad vision. What most Zimbabweans are interested in is what is the answer to the problems that young people are facing today? What solutions do you have for the next generation? If you ask most Zimbabweans, they're not really interested in a fight between Douglas Monzora or what, this or other personality is saying. And that is what we are focused on as a political party. So when you ask us what solutions do we have, it's the solutions that the people want about solving Zimbabwe's problems that we are focused on. Blessed. And if you look at the entirety of my statement today, that's what we've been focused on. What is best for Zimbabwe? We're not interested in power for power's own sake, which are the solutions that the Monzoras, the Kupes are after. We're focused on solutions that will take Zimbabwe forward, which is why I spoke to Reload, which is why I spoke to our 5 big fights, which is why we're talking about reforms that deal with the systemic issues that are going to take Zimbabwe forward. That's what we, and together with President Chamisa, have said continuously, we want to introduce a new style of politics that's going to remedy the problems that this nation faces for the long term. We're not here to fix the here and now for 2 days. No, we're not here to sort out our own, political fates for the next few days. We're here to solve the people's problems. And when I spoke initially, I said I'm speaking on behalf of the 2.6 million people who vested their trust in us. And it's solving the problems of those 2.6 million people. That's what we are focused on right now, not these petty squabbles. So really, when they go low, we choose to go high. Thank you.
I'm sure that is any more question? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, organizing secretary of staff.
Press.
Yeah.
I want to thank in particular the spokesperson for starting the press in time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, organizing. Thank you so much. Oh, we're going to post it on our brand new website. And by the way, we have a brand new website. So literally within the next hour, it's going to be posted up and you'll have access to it. So right now, it's going to go up.
hour is too long.
Sorry? No, less than an hour, I promise you. Less than an hour, it's going to go up now. Our team is going to upload it immediately. Yes,
Just remind me of one question. which I
Yes.
didn't forget.
it's okay.
I've gone to your website and I've seen the different membership fees. $60 for locals, 20 for rest of Africa, and 70 for the rest of the world.
Yes.
That differentiation, does it not affect the worth of each member? Would someone who pays $70 have an equal vote to someone who pays 60?
So thank you so much for that question. Senator David Coltart is going to do a full brief to everyone to explain, number one, the differentials in membership, to explain, number two, how long your membership lasts. He's going to explain, a lot of people have been asking, wow, is Madam Kupe going to get her fingers into our donations? All of that is under control, and I assure you that Senator David Coltart is going to address, as the Treasurer General, all of the issues that arise from that. So I promise you it will be comprehensively dealt with. Okay, thank you so much. Right. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Sorry.